Within the world of Bleach, it's no secret that despite being a main character, Yasutora Chad Sado is underpowered and underappreciated. This has led to him becoming somewhat of a joke within the Bleach community, especially when you take into account Ichigo saying that he can't ever imagine Chad losing right before he loses to Kyoraku Shunsui. So I'm going to be taking it upon myself to see how many Chads it take to beat every relevant antagonist that Ichigo fights throughout the Bleach story, so that Ichigo truly can't imagine him losing. I'm going to be going over these characters, but if you want to see me go over any other characters, be them protagonists or antagonists, let me know. Maybe I'll make a part 2. For reference, I'm going to be using Hueco Mundo Chad after his fight with Gatenbine to scale all of these opponents, even the early story ones. Considering he fights Gatenbine, someone with a rank, it'll be easier to infer his strength compared to the other Espada and maybe even some of the other antagonists. You might be wondering why I'm not using Fullbringer Arc Chad or 1000 Year Blood War Arc Chad, and I'm not using them because they have little to no feats, so there's nothing to base their strength off of because we haven't even seen the full extent of their strength. But hopefully we'll see some Chad representation within the next 2 cores of the 1000 Year Blood War Arc anime adaptation. Regardless, please keep in mind this video will be 99% speculation, guesswork, and assumptions. I'm not a devoted power scaler, so my views on character strengths might be very skewed. As for a note, Hack's abilities are going to be ignored unless I explicitly mention them. This is, for the most part, just based on overall strength. This video is mostly for fun, rather than a scientific discussion on how strong Chad is and how strong Bleach antagonists are, so if you disagree, please don't get too mad at me. Just let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section. And while you're down there, why not leave a like and sub? This video was way more work than you'd think, so I would really appreciate it. So, with all that out the way, let's get started. So, let's start off with Ichigo's first somewhat relevant antagonist, Grand Fisher. This one's fairly obvious, and I'm not even going to bother explaining myself. 1 Chad. Next is Renji during his and Byakuya's retrieval of Rukia. This is another easy one that I'm not going to explain. 1 Chad. Onto Ikkaku during the Soul Society arc, another very obvious one, and I'm getting tired of saying this, but I'm not going to bother explaining. 1 Chad. Finally, onto something interesting, Soul Society Kenpachi. Keep in mind that Kenpachi is subconsciously limited here, and Ichigo hasn't gone through Bankai training yet, so he's still pretty weak all things considered. So, while technically Kenpachi's limiter would rise to match Chad, I'm gonna assume he's limited at the same level he was during his fight with Ichigo. That being said, 1 Chad. Onto Byakuya. I think this is the first instance of a truly strong character being shown to us. Byakuya is no slouch, and he doesn't have a limiter like Kenpachi does. With his own Bankai, he's able to handedly beat Bankai Ichigo, and Ichigo needs help from Zangetsu to land a few attacks that level the playing field for Ichigo to just barely beat him. So at this point, I think we need multiple Chads, and I'm going to say it'd take 3 Chads to beat him, but 2 may have a chance. Base Yami is a fairly weak character, honestly. He does handedly beat Chad, but this is post-Soul Society Chad, not Hueco Mundo Chad. He hasn't unlocked the true form of his right arm, and hasn't unlocked his left at all. But Ichigo does fare really well against Yami until Zangetsu interferes. Bankai Ichigo could have beat base Yami fairly easily, so I'm gonna say this is less than 3 Chads for sure. And as Yami says, the Espada are 0 to 9, not 1 to 10, so base Yami isn't even considered Espada level strength. I think 1 Chad could match him, but 2 Chads will definitely take the win. Also, as a tangent, the whole Espada 0 thing should have never happened, and Chad should have just rematched Yami and Hueco Mundo, but I digress. Moving on to Grimmjow. As a note, this is base Grimmjow. We'll be going over Resurrection Grimmjow later. I know it sucks to wait, but I am going in order of the story for the most part. Similarly to Byakuya, Ichigo requires the help of his hollow side to even evenly match Grimmjow, at least in their first fight. But after his training with the Vizards, he's able to pretty handedly overpower Grimmjow, at least until his mask breaks. Comparing Grimmjow to Soul Society Byakuya, I'd say Grimmjow is a decent bit stronger. So we'll need at least 3 Chads, but my final answer is 4 Chads to beat him. On to a Prevarian Espada, we have Dordoni next. We know Dordoni is obviously stronger than Gatenbine due to his higher rank, but how much stronger? Honestly, I don't think he's strong enough to beat left arm Chad, because after unlocking his left arm, Chad is able to pretty easily beat Gatenbine. In terms of pure power, I think 1 Chad would be enough, but factoring in Dordoni's annoying moveset with the tornadoes, I think it would take 2 Chads. Next is Resurrection Grimmjow, and we see a large increase of power from his base form. Now, this is where the Chad scaling starts to really get loose. We see a stronger Ichigo here, and we don't really have anyone to base this Ichigo off of. We know he certainly gets stronger, but by how much? So, instead, we're going to look at Grimmjow and do some really janky math. Resurrection has been shown to be comparable to Bankai, and we know Bankai can raise the strength of a Shinigami 5 to 10 times. So from here, it just takes simple math. Inputting our 4 chads to be base Grimmjow, on a low ball it'd take 20 chads to beat Resurrection, and on a high ball it'd take 40 chads. I think that's a somewhat accurate result, and honestly, I don't really see a better way of figuring this out. So I'm going to take our low ball and say it'd take 20 chads to beat him, because honestly, I don't see his Resurrection making him any stronger than 5 times. Moving on to Ulquiorra, this is where things start to get really loose. I'm going to be going over base, first Resurrection, and second Resurrection all separately. Starting with base, I'm going to assume base Ulquiorra is weaker than Resurrection Grimmjow, to the point where that if they fought, base Ulquiorra would lose. So, I'm going to assume Ulquiorra is 60% as strong as Resurrection Grimmjow. 60% of 20 leaves us with 12 chads. So, I'm going to assume it'd take 12 chads to beat base Ulquiorra. Now, on to first Resurrection Ulquiorra. I'm going to use the same math technique, and that leaves us with 60 chads as a low ball and 120 chads as a high ball. I'm going to pick our low ball and say 60 chads could beat first Resurrection Ulquiorra. Now, here's where things get very interesting and very confusing. For Segunda Etapa, if we're assuming another 5 times to 10 times increase in power, compared to base, that's 25 times to 100 times stronger. So on the low end, it'd take 300 chads, and on the high end, it would take 1200 chads. That's a ridiculous amount. So, to pick our final amount, I'm going to lowball Ulquiorra's first Resurrection and say it takes 60 chads to beat him. And as for Segunda Etapa, it's noted that it increases his regeneration mainly, not his power. So I'm going to go with a 5.5 times increase, which leaves us with 330 chads. So, in conclusion, that leaves us with 12 chads to beat base Ulquiorra, 60 chads to beat first Resurrection Ulquiorra, and 330 chads to beat second Resurrection Ulquiorra. Wow, that was very confusing. But I'm not done with Ulquiorra just yet. There's another way to spin his resurrections. Comparing to Bankai again, since we know resurrection has 2 stages, it's possible that the first resurrection brings us to that 5 times increase, and the second resurrection brings us to that total 10 times increase, if that makes sense at all. That means it only takes 60 chads to beat first resurrection Ulquiorra, and 120 chads to beat Segunda Etapa Ulquiorra. So, choose which version you'd prefer. Personally, I think 330 chads is closer to reality, so I'm going with that. Gin is next up, and he's interesting for sure. Gin largely relies on speed and length, rather than just pure power. I have no idea how to scale Gin, so I'm going to be doing some guesswork, particularly guessing around his rank. Considering Gin is the right-hand man of Aizen, I think it'd be reasonable if he was able to stop Ulquiorra in his first resurrection. It would certainly stop Ulquiorra from thinking, I'm stronger than this guy, I don't have to listen to him. Not that Ulquiorra would be the type anyway. So I'm going to go with a very rough guess and say it'd take at least 60 chads to beat Gin, but I am going to infer that he's slightly stronger than first resurrection Ulquiorra, so I'm going to bump that number up to 70 chads. Now I'm going to be going through each of Aizen's forms, starting with his first fusion with the Hogyoku. Now, I will admit, this section will be a lot of guessing and a lot of assumptions, but I'm going to do my best to give somewhat reasonable guesses. Now, for Aizen, it'd make a lot of sense for him to be stronger than Segunda Etapa in base, so I'm going to give him a reasonable 400 chad yes for base. Now, moving on to the Hogyoku form. I think that this form is stronger than his base form, but not by a significant amount. So I'm going to guess and give him a 15% increase in power, which raises our chads from 400 to 460. Our next Aizen form is Chrysalis Aizen. This is seemingly a much larger jump in strength compared to his first fusion form, so I'm going to give this a very rough guess of a 2 times increase, leaving us with 920 chads. Now we have post-Chrysalis Aizen. This form is also significantly stronger, but I don't think the jump is as big as the one between first and second. I'm going to go with the middling guess here and say this is a 50% increase, so that leaves us with 1,380 chads. On to Butterfly Aizen. This jump seems like a similar amount as the one between Chrysalis and post-Chrysalis, so I'll say it's another 50% increase. That leaves us with 2,070 chads. Now we have Aizen's final form, which I call his monster form. This seems like another significant jump in line with the last 2 percentage increases, so again, I will be assuming a 50% increase. That means, in order to beat Final Form Aizen, we need a whopping 3,105 chads. That is an astronomical amount of chads. We're going to take a bit of a gap between the 2 final villains and talk about Ginjo. Ginjo is a bit odd. We see him fight Ichigo in a time where Ichigo is still climbing back up the ladder of power, but Ginjo is also no slouch. I'm gonna take a shot in the dark and compare him to Ulquiorra. I think Bankai Ginjo could pretty handily beat First Resurrection Ulquiorra, but I think he'd struggle against Segunda Etapa and ultimately lose. So I'm gonna place him below that 330 Chad mark, but not by much. I think 250 Chads is a pretty reasonable guess, but I can totally understand if you think that's a bit too high. Soul King Yhwach. I'm going to be skipping over base Yhwach for a variety of reasons. We have no real strength feats for base Yhwach, aside from the fact he's stronger than Ichibei, or else Ichibei wouldn't have had to rename him, his arm, or his sword. So if you really want me to take a wild guess here, not like I haven't been doing that already, I'm going to assume he's a decent bit stronger than Yamamoto, considering he was able to take his Bankai. And since Yamamoto was a threat to Aizen, I'd placed Yamamoto at post-Chrysalis Aizen level. That leaves us with 1,380 Chads for Yamamoto. Yhwach is obviously stronger, so I'll say 1,500 Chads for base Yhwach. Now, onto Soul King Yhwach. Because Chad can do absolutely nothing against the Almighty, we're going to assume we're in the situation where Uryu just shot the Still Silver Arrow, and we have one attack to take him down. To find out how many Chads we'll need, I'm going to scale around Ichigo here. Personally, based off feats, I believe True Bankai Horn of Salvation Ichigo is still weaker than Mugetsu Ichigo, but not by much. Unrelated, but I'd love to be shown wrong in Core 4 of the anime adaptation, I really want to see a longer fight where we see more of Ichigo's true power, but I digress. Anyway, if we assume Horn of Salvation Ichigo is slightly weaker than Mugetsu Ichigo, say 80%, that gives us something to work with. Mugetsu seemed much stronger than Monster Aizen, at least 2 times stronger, but I feel like it's more like 3 times. So if we have 3,105 Chads to beat Monster Aizen, that means we'd need 9,315 Chads to beat Mugetsu. 80% of 9,315 gives us 7,452 Chads, which is how many we'd need to beat True Bankai Horn of Salvation Ichigo. But we're not done yet. We know Aizen has gotten stronger since his monster form, and I'd place 1000 Year Blood War Aizen at around 2 times stronger than monster form. So that means we need 6,210 Chads to beat Aizen. Since Yhwach can beat Chair Aizen, we now have a range. The amount of Chads we need to beat Soul King Yhwach is greater than 6,210, but less than 7,452, because obviously Yhwach can't beat Horn of Salvation Ichigo. I'd place the amount of Chads we need right in the middle, strong enough to beat Aizen, but weak enough to lose to Horn of Salvation Ichigo. That leaves us with a grand total of 6,831 Chads to beat Soul King Yhwach. So, now you know it takes 6,831 Hueco Mundo level Chads to wipe the entire Bleachverse. What do you think? Too many? Too little? Just right? Please, let me know. To me, honestly, it feels like an absolutely ridiculous amount of Chads. This video took way more time than you'd probably think, so please leave a like and sub for more wild videos like this one, or for just Bleach discussion videos in general. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and that's all for now.